Hi, I have made a video explaining all the problems and caveats you could face when tuning derailleurs. So if things shown in this video don't help you, you can look at that other video that I will link in this video's description. As always, you will have to put up with my Tarzan English, yes, very wonderful, and with the background noises. So let's get on with it. This is more of a standard video like you will see on all the other YouTube channels, but we have a tricky real-life problem here, so it will be more fun for me and maybe more long and tedious for you to watch. Anyway, for fixing derailleurs, you usually need Allen wrenches or hex wrenches. 5 millimeters usually do the job. You will need a cross-tip screwdriver. I've made a video explaining how to pick a good quality, especially for Shimano and other Japanese parts, cross-headed screws. I will link to it in this video's description. You will need this, and you might need also, for some models, these that have, like, I don't know, it's Torx, I think is the proper English term. And for some you will need 8 or 9 millimeter wrench, either with this opening like round or like this. In this video I will create like a table of contents, so you can skip to the part of interest and don't have to watch the entire video. And I will try to explain everything so that you understand why you're doing what you're doing. For me, that is the best way. I like when I understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, because in case of any complications I can more easily figure out what's creating the problems and the headaches. So for some this will be simple and maybe stupid, they know it already, but I think it's important to note and explain, because I don't know the level of knowledge of anyone watching this. Hi. So derailleurs are relatively stupid machines. The only thing they do is they move back and forth. So let's try to find the cable. Okay, here it's all enclosed, but let's take a look at this front one. When I'm pulling on the cable, it moves outwards. When I release the cable, it moves inwards. That's all it does. And with index shifters pull a preset amount of cable for each click. This movement should be compatible, so that the amount of cable that the shifter pulls or releases should suffice and be just right to create a shift and make the derailleur move the chain to the adjacent chainring. The same thing goes for the rear derailleurs. When I pull on the cable or release it, it should move exactly right under the adjacent sprocket to make a gear shift. That is the basic principle, and that is what we are trying to do. And with the index shifters, if the derailleur is not set to be right in line with a chainring, if it is moved a bit off, then with every other shift it will also remain in the same off movement, and the shifting will never be correct. With two limiting factors that are the largest and the smallest chainring at the rear, or the smallest and the largest in the front, that is the outermost chainrings. These are not just the movement of the derailleur is not just affected by how the shifter cable is pulling or pushing or releasing, but also by the limit screws, and we'll get to that. But for now it's just important to note that the two limit screws for the high and low position limit how much the derailleur goes outwards or inwards. They're important to be set correctly, and if they are not set correctly, you will have problems when shifting in those two, like severe combinations. So let's start with how to tune the front derailleur. For the front derailleur, it is important to make it be in line, parallel to the front chainrings, and to be 2 to 4 millimeters. Let's move the chain off. Okay. Now the chain is not in the way. Okay. We want it to be 2 to 4 millimeters above the largest chaining. In this case, it is a bit higher. it looks parallel when I'm looking at it from in line, but it is a bit too high. However, in this particular case, if I move it any lower, it will hit the chainstay. So with this bicycle, to get the perfect front shifting, we would have to get larger chainrings or cut off the chainstay, but that's a bit extreme. So also the shape of this front derailleur needs to match the shape of the chainrings. In this case, this is a lot less severe curve compared to this curve, and that is another thing that will prevent this shifter from this derailleur from working perfectly, but we can get it to work satisfactorily enough, I hope. And that's the first setting. Now, how do I start tuning the front derailleur? Another thing, it's iterations. I'm not sure how to say it as a noun. Iterative process, maybe. When you're tuning derailleurs, if your front derailleur is too much off and moving chain not correctly, you will have problems with the rear shifting. Same goes vice versa. So I usually start by getting the front derailleur somewhat correct in the first go. Then I fine-tune the rear derailleur, then I go back and fine-tune the front derailleur. It's a bit of a back and forth process, but I think it's the best way to get the perfect results. So let's start by fixing this front derailleur. I've shifted to the smallest front chainring in the front, and I will shift to the largest rear chainring at the back. Now what I want here is this is my starting point when I'm tuning. I will just provisionally attach the rear derailleur cable and make sure it's moved here, sometimes even by pushing it by hand, just to get it to the starting position. What I want here is to avoid the inner side of the front derailleur cage from scratching on the chain. So it should not be like this. Okay? And how do I achieve that? Okay, sorry, we'll get to that. The first thing before that is to get it to be parallel. Sorry about that. Here I want this to be run parallel to the front chainring, and I want to be about 2 to 4 millimeters above it. In this case, I have a limit, so I cannot put it any lower, perhaps 1 millimeter only, to avoid it from hitting the chainring, the chainstay. That is the first thing I will do. So I got a 5 millimeter hex wrench. This derailleur has this like a round hanger to attach it, and I need to loosen this bolt to move the front derailleur. I have an article explaining the different front derailleur mounting standards and cable routing standards. I will link it in this video's description. So here we're loosening this. And this is a tip. If you have these hex wrenches with this like a round tip, that allows you to use it at an angle. It's very convenient, but never use force either when you are loosening or tightening. Always use these like straight ones when you're initially loosening or tightening, and then later to work faster you can use this one. So that's why I first loosened it using this end, and now I can use this one freely. So I'm loosening this. Okay, it's loose. Now I can try and pull this down a bit. I'm minding the gap to see if it doesn't hit the chainstays. Okay, looks good enough. And now I'm looking at the angle. Okay, this looks okay. Tightening it. This bicycle has a lot of dirt, so this stays in place, which is very convenient. So you usually have to hold it by hand. Okay, this looks okay. I'm not tightening it to the full specified torque. I just want to see first what it looks like. Is it parallel? So I shifted it to the middle chainring in this case. For the bicycles that have only 2 chainrings, you don't have to do that shift, just move it a bit. And I'm trying to see if it's parallel, the outer side of the front derailleur cage compared to the relative to the front chainring. And this looks more or less good. It's okay. it's okay. This is sometimes curved to the outside in this rear edge, but I'm looking at this section. I might move it just a bit later when I'm fine-tuning it, but for start this looks reasonably well, so I'll just tighten it. Okay, it's not going anywhere now. And I will see if it catches on the chainring when I'm shifting. We'll have to do a test ride later. Always do a test ride when you're tuning derailleurs, because something that looks fine on the stand may look off and be off when you're riding. Because this will flex a bit, so if it starts hitting, we know we have to move it further back out. But for now it looks okay. We've got 1 millimeter of spare room, so it's good, but it's closer to the front chainring now than it was before, I think. Yeah, a bit. It's better. We couldn't move it any further. So the next thing I do is to make sure that this limit screw is as the low limit screw that prevents the front derailleur from making the chain go off completely. I want to make sure that it is loose enough to allow for good shifting in the smallest chainring, but tight enough to prevent the chain from dropping. And I usually start by, here you can see in the camera, if I catch from this angle, as I'm tightening this you will see the cage moving outwards. Now it's too far out. Turning it back a bit. Okay. Now it's not all the way in, but I want to see if it shifts nicely to the smallest chainring, it's good enough. Another thing to pay attention to is the cable tension. If the cable is too tight, you can loosen this screw all the way, but the derailleur won't move. In that case, you need to release the cable and set it. We'll do that also here, just to demonstrate. Alright, so in case everything is off, we loosen the cable. Okay, now if I'm shifting, nothing happens. So here I shift all the way to release all the cable in the front. I tighten this bolt, this adjustment like barrel to release all the tension here and release it here while pulling. So it's completely loose, and now I want to pinch it. I make sure to route it properly. For this model it goes like this around, and when I tighten it by hand, hold it snugly and tighten the bolt, I will probably not be able to use enough force. And this is especially the case with modern Shimano 11-speed road front derailleurs. And there you have to do a small trick. You tighten the low limit screw a bit too far out to have the cage almost hit the chain. It's a bit of a trial and error, but in a few goes you get to it. So you have it almost hit the chain. So this is too far out, and so even though I won't be able to tighten this properly by hand or even by using some pliers, usually you never get enough tension here. The fact that the bolt, the screw for limit is already pushed this too far out will probably make this be good enough. I'm not tightening it to the full torque. First I want to check if this works, but I also don't leave this too loose to be easily pulled out, to slip. So it's somewhere in between. Okay, now I will get this back, and you will probably see this move back unless the cable is too tight. Okay, now this is no longer working because the cable is holding it in place. So I can adjust it up to a point. Okay, now it's no longer moving, but I get it just right to prevent the chain from dropping in case this breaks. I don't want the chain to drop between the chainring and the frame to not damage anything. Okay, now let's see if this works. If you install new cables and shifters, the shifters will, and the new cables and housings, the cables and housings will over time like work itself and get a bit, the cable will effectively get elongated and loosened a bit. So if you're working with completely new cables and housing, try to push this strongly on the gear lever and release it, and do this a few times to put some force without turning the pedals, not too much to damage anything, but this is called cable pre-stretching, and so they will work their way faster and you will not have it loose after 100 kilometers of riding to need to fine-tune it again. And let's see if this works okay. It looks okay for now. If we face any problems with shifting down, we will loosen the cable a bit. Another thing is if your cable is not tight enough, you can use these adjustment barrels. Now, on road bicycles, there is usually no adjustment barrel here in the front, in the shifters, and for the front derailleur there is no adjustment barrel on the derailleurs. Most rear derailleurs have one. This one doesn't, but most do. Many do. But the fronts, for the front ones, it's practically never here. So there is a, in case your shifters don't have this adjustment barrel for fine tuning that are especially important for the rear, but help a lot for the front, there is a way around. Here, this is made by Jaguar. I might put an Amazon affiliate link and become rich, but it's a thing. It's very handy because you put shifter cable on both sides and then you can turn it and do the fine tuning. I usually install it in the front section so that it can be easily tuned on either road or mountain bikes. So it's a neat little thing if you want to fine tune your derailleur and there are no adjustment barrels. But here, when we come to this, this starting position is okay. I might have done another thing, that is to start with this barrel not completely inside, because in this case I have no room for fine adjustments to loosen the cable a bit. But for front derailleurs the situation is such that it's usually the problem to get the proper amount of tension, especially if you're using new housing and cables that get a bit elongated over time. So I start by having this barrel for adjustment all the way in, so I have all the room a lot more room to further tighten it, and I usually don't need any loosening room. So in this case I got it right from the start, but depending on your experience and skill levels, you might do it in a few goes, and you might want to try with this perhaps a bit out from the start by a few turns to at least have some room to also loosen the cable, not just tighten it. So this is the starting setup. Now I will move the chain all the way to the smallest rear chaining, and let's see about the shifting outwards. I'll try to make a shift to the middle chaining. It drops off nicely from the middle chaining and it moves nicely to the back to it. Let's try the largest. Alright, we're now on the largest chaining, and what I'm looking at here is whether I can, by pushing on the lever, move the derailleur cage too much out to drop the chain off the front chaining. If that is the case, if that were the case, I would have to tighten the high limit screw to make this movement more limited. And in case this doesn't move enough far out to make the shift, I would have to loosen this high limit screw. They are used, the low and high limit screws, for limiting the movement. So in this case, I think this is good. This is perfect. But here we have a problem. It's not willing to move. This chain is worn, but that problem of worn chain usually creates problems at the rear. At the front, I'm not worried about the worn chain. but I am worried about the tension of the cable. See, it won't move. I have to shift to the smallest and then shift back. Okay, so now I can, how do they say, eat my words or something, because I should have created more room to loosen the cable. Now I have to do it in a more complicated way. Okay, I'm holding on to this. Shift it all the way to the smallest and loosening the pinch bolt. Okay, I can feel the cable moving, loosening, and let's see if this was enough or we need to do more adjustments. All right. This is a bit better, but I will loosen it further. To do this, I have already tried to loosen the cable and the pinch bolt and see how much it pulls out. And it hasn't pulled out enough. Now I can try to push it out by hand, but that is very imprecise. What I will do is to move this barrel for one turn outwards, and then when I loosen this cable, it should pull the cable out. But in order to do that, I would have to also loosen the limit screw by, say, half a turn. That will allow the derailleur to move further in and to get the slip along the cable. So that's what I expect to happen. I'm not sure if it will be caught on the camera. Okay, let's first loosen this. Okay, it's loosened now. Let's see. Okay, you can see it moving. You can see the cable sliding. That's enough. Let's give it a test and then fine-tune it if we need to. I will put the limit screw back in place because I don't want the chain dropping off in case some cable snaps during a ride for whatever reason. And now let's see about our shifting. It should still not be working perfectly because I haven't loosened at the barrel end. It's better but not perfect. Let's try to loosen this a bit, say half a turn. It looks okay. I try to shift to the largest rear, and now let's see for the shifting to the smallest. A bit hesitant. Let's try to loosen the cable a bit more and see if this moves. If it doesn't, I would also have to loosen this bolt, the limit screw. Okay, it doesn't move. I just turned the barrel for over quarter of a turn, and now I'll loosen this a bit more. You will see this move. All right, let's give it another go. Okay, this is good. It's not hesitating at all. We'll try it under load, moderate load, and in over bumps on a test ride, but for the stand, this looks okay. We are most likely fine with the front derailleur tuning, but we will fine tune it further after we finish the rear derailleur tuning. Now for the rear derailleur, okay, this is where we would start, and I will completely loosen this pinch bolt to start from the top, as the Americans say, as if we had nothing properly fixed. All right, this can move now freely. Again, I will tighten this all the way in. All right, and now what I want to do is fix the high limit screw. I want the highest, how do you call this, jockey wheel, or like this small sprocket here, to be perfectly aligned with the smallest rear chainring, just underneath it, and for half a chainring width to the out. So starting from them being perfectly aligned with each other, I want the jockey wheel to be just a bit more to the outside. In my experience, this provides the perfect shifting. You will later tune it with the cable tension to prevent it from going too far out. And if the cable snaps by setting the limit in this way, it will still not move the chain off the chaining to get stuck here and damage the frame. But for some reason it allows for perfect rear derailleur functioning. And so I'm looking at these two limit screws. This one is for limiting the outer movement, and now you will see if I screw it in, the rear derailleur will move to the inside. They are aligned now, and I will let it move a bit further out. That's about right, I think. Okay, so I'm moving it also by hand to make sure that no friction or something is creating problems, and cleaning and lubricating everything before tuning usually helps. It's a good idea, which we will not do now. Okay, now I just want to see, gently turning this to see if the chain will drop. This is loose, so the cable is playing no part here. I just want to make sure the chain is not dropping. And what's happening here? I need to put it further out because it's trying to shift to the largest front chaining. All right. This is good. If it drops, you just stop pedaling and put it back. Do it slowly to avoid any damage. Okay. This looks okay for a start. And that's for that limit screw. What I would do now is completely, again, turn this barrel adjuster all the way in. If you have a barrel adjuster at the rear, also turn it all the way in, because once you tighten the pinch bolt, don't do this at home. I'm a trained professional. This is most likely to not be tight enough, so we'll need to further tighten it there. So we want to start with the position that allows us most adjustment. Okay, let's tighten this, and don't go crazy on this torque when you are tuning. Only finally you will go to the specified 5 Newton meters or whatever is recommended for the model. Okay, now let's see the shifting. I will do one click. Okay, it moves. Second, and in the mid section of the cassette, or if you don't, or if on a third or fourth rear sprocket, no matter how many gears you have, it's usually, in my opinion and experience, best to do the fine tuning initially on the first few sprockets, like third or fourth, and on the largest in the front. So I'm trying to see now, it moves up nicely, and let's see how it moves back. It's not bad. Now let's go on. I will shift to the smallest up front, and let's get to the largest in the rear. All right, here what we want to do is I forgot to mention one important thing. For shifters, for rear derailleurs, they have a clutch. When you're tuning them, you need to release the clutch on mountain bikes and similar. Also, if the bicycle has rear suspension, you need to uncompress it, to deflate it, and to make it move freely. So when you are tuning the position of the front derailleur and of the rear, you want to see across the whole range of movement whether something is getting hit, whether if the front chaining moves relative to the front derailleur, you want to see it during the full motion if it hits something and adjust to prevent that from happening during riding. And same goes for the rear derailleur when you're fine tuning it, so you have another complication for full suspension bicycles, and it's important to keep that in mind. And also again, for the derailleurs that have a clutch, you need to release it and fine tune it, because the clutch, when it is engaged, it prevents the chain from bouncing but creates some drag, and it's more difficult to tune the derailleur with that engaged. Just don't forget to re-engage it again before you go on the bumpy rides. Okay, so now let's get back to this. What I want to make sure here are two things. First, I don't want the rear derailleur to be able to pull the chain into the spokes onto the wheel. So I will slowly turn this and keep pushing on the derailleur to see if the chain can drop off. And I try to conservatively adjust the low limit screw to make the derailleur move only as much as it needs to make the change, so that it is aligned with the jockey wheel is aligned with the largest rear sprocket, but not even a part of a millimeter further to the inside. If I have to choose between slower shifting and the high risk of getting the chain stuck here and damaging the spokes, I would rather choose slower shifting. But you can usually get this all working properly if you do this right. So we'll get good shifting, but no possibility of this. So I'm pushing it by hand just in case. I also try to pull on the shifter lever to see if that can cause it to drop into the sprockets, while turning this slowly to prevent any damage. As soon as it drops, I will stop. Okay, this is okay. Now we need another adjustment to make, and that is done using something called the B screw. And what the B screw does is adjust this distance, basically. So this is here, and to adjust the B distance, I will shift once in the front to the larger and the lower and see where this ends. It should be about 5 millimeters away from the jockey wheel should be about 5 millimeters away from the largest rear sprocket, when it is on the largest rear sprocket when you're shifting. And if it is further closer, it will start hitting it, and if it's further out, the shifting will be slower and not work very well. In this case, it is aligned properly, but let's see what happens when I move this. It's probably best from the side shown. Okay, when I screw this in, it moves outwards. When I screw it out, it moves further closer, and I want it to be about, depending on the model of the derailleur, this distance differs, but generally a rule of thumb is that about 5 millimeters is just the right way. For modern Shimano 11 and 12 speeds systems, I think it's higher. It's about 8 millimeters or something. Okay, so I'm just rechecking to see how this goes. The chain looks parallel. It's not trying to go off on this side and can't go off into the spokes. That's good. Okay, now let's see the fine tuning. I'm now in the middle chainring, and I'm going over the whole range of the cassette, and I can see a problem here. I'm in the largest, and when I release, it gets 2 gears down. Now let's try to shift to a larger. It's hesitating. Okay, this means that I need to tighten the cable a bit. Okay, how do I do that? The most easily using the barrel adjuster, but there is a small trick that I use. That is, without turning the pedals, I downshift a few times to have the cable loose, so this can be turned freely without any housing pressing on it. And I will give it a liberal 2 full turns outside, and now see what happens. I will shift back to the gear where I was, and now let's see. Problems like this, if they cannot be fixed with fine tuning, are usually due to something being worn in the cables or housing, this not being lubricated enough, the derailleur pivots, or the hanger being off, being at an angle as I've shown in the other video. So I'm not sure what is causing the problems here exactly, but this shifting is not perfect still, and it looks like the problem of the cable being sorry, the cable being too loose and nothing else. Okay, it is. I hadn't tightened this enough. That was the problem. So back to the drawing board, I have to loosen the barrel, screw it all the way in, and put this a lot tighter. Okay, this was my mistake. Too much talking and not paying enough attention. Okay, let's give it another go back from the top. All right, this looks more or less okay. But I have a problem. I can notice it in my lever when I'm trying to shift into the largest chainring. It cannot freely click. It's just like this is too limited. So I will loosen this by a quarter of a turn, the low limit screw, and see if it can still keep preventing this from dropping into the spokes. I'm very conservative on this side. I prefer to have more difficult shifting than run the risk of any damage, but I try to get it right. So in a few iterations. Now let's see. Now I can get a nice click at the lever and it looks fine. Okay, and let's see about the shifting across the range. It looks okay. Let's start from the smallest. Okay, it seems we got it right. Now, this doesn't always happen, especially when you have new cables and housing. What you need to do is, like I shown in the front derailleur, you need to, while nothing is moving, you're not spinning the pedals, to push and then release, and do that 2 or 3 times, not too much to damage the shifter or break anything, but to get them sort of like working each other. And then you might want to turn the barrel about a half a turn out, or depending on what needs to be done to get the shifting perfectly. And this helps you not have to do that after like 100 kilometers of riding when everything works in. So if you're doing it at home or in a shop, this is called cable pre-stretching, and it helps. Okay. Any fine tuning is done by unscrewing the barrel, which effectively tightens the cable, pulling more on it. If you have problems shifting to a larger sprocket, you tighten it. If you have problems downshifting, you loosen it. If you have problems with the outwards or most inwards sprockets, then you need to also pay attention to how your limit screws are set up. They can also cause problems here. And did I forget something? Of course, yes, Shimano used to make in a moment of brilliance rear derailleurs that were called how did they call them? They work in the opposite direction. When the cable is tightened, the derailleurs move outwards. When the cable is released, the derailleur is moved inwards. I can't remember the name, but generally the normal derailleurs are called top normal, and those Shimano derailleurs that work reversely are called low normal, or something like that. I can't even remember. I will put a link to my article where I explain this. Rapid rise, yes, rapid rise. Yeah, that was the brilliant move from the marketing section. Rapid rise derailleurs. And when you're working with those, everything is the opposite of what I've just explained. So if you need the derailleur to move further out, you tighten the cable. If you need it to move further in, you loosen the cable. And when setting the limit screws, if you completely loosen the cable, the derailleur will move all the way to the largest chainring, not to the smallest. So when setting the outwards limit screw, you need to completely release the cable to make sure that the derailleur is moved all the way out and not prevented by this. Then fine tune your limit screws and only then tighten the cable and retune it. These derailleurs, I don't know for what reason, but they don't work as well in practice, at least in my experience. Even when they are paired with the original components like shifters for the rapid rise. They can work with shifters that are not rapid rise only if they have like numbers of gears. It will be reversed. So the fastest gear, highest gear will end up with the derailleur being on the largest chainring and running on the smallest gear. But even when they're paired with the original shifters for rapid rise, they don't work as well for some reason, no matter how much time you spend tuning them. They're not very good idea in my opinion and experience. So that might be one of the reasons why they are no longer being produced and sold, and all the derailleurs now are like top normal, like normal derailleurs. So I hope I haven't missed anything, and sorry if the video was a bit long, but I tried to encompass all the problems that you could face and to save myself some time when someone asks about problems with tuning their derailleurs, to be able to send them this video and hopefully be able to help themselves and fix their bikes. So thank you for watching, and that's it. Cheers.